This is part 6 of The Disappearance of Belinda Van Lith. Before we begin this part of the series, I would like to state that Timothy Crosby has not been charged with a crime related to Belinda's disappearance. And in this country, all people are considered innocent until proven guilty in the court of law.
She was very outgoing. She was very beautiful always. She's a very popular girl, very athletic, and she loved gardening. I mean, she had it made at home. She had nothing to run away from.
If they were doing stuff like that, more people should have known, because
The family should have known first.
I firmly believe that the more people that know information, somebody saw something somewhere, and whether it was a critical piece of information, it might have led to a critical piece of information.
I do stupid things when I was younger, yeah. Did I understand why I was doing them? No.
Did you kill Belinda? Did you kidnap her or have anything to do with her going missing? After Timothy Crosby confessed to paying a 17-year-old girl to perform sexual acts, investigators with the Wright County Sheriff's Office, the St. Paul Police Department, and the FBI executed another search warrant at his St. Paul home. And what they found was troubling. Timothy Crosby's 17-year-old victim told investigators about a secret room he showed her in his basement. Inside the room was a bed and an assortment of cameras. She told investigators the basement and the secret room were much cleaner than the rest of the house. She described the main living area as filthy, but the basement was clean and often smelled like bleach. There are a lot of photos from this search in the investigative file, and from what I could tell, she was right about the stark difference between the basement and the rest of the home. Another thing that stood out to me when sorting through those images of the home was the easy access to the basement through the back door. If you were outside of Timothy Crosby's home in the backyard and you opened the back door, you'd see the basement door just a few feet away in front of you. So a person could easily go in and out of the basement without disturbing whoever else was in the house. The secret room was only the tip of the iceberg for investigators. More than 30 items were collected and taken into evidence, including a number of newspaper clippings and magazine articles about rape, serial killers, homicide, and sex offenders. Investigators also discovered a hacksaw located in the trunk of Timothy Crosby's vehicle. The saw was collected for evidence in the case of Martha Bacon, whose dismembered remains were discovered in Wright County in 1993. Investigators believe a saw was used in her dismemberment. Her case is ongoing and sealed. This is what Lieutenant Mike Lindquist wrote in his report about the saw. This made officers suspicious as to what the hacksaw blade was used for, as it was with pornography and other odd objects, and locked in the trunk so nobody could easily access it. A Mac computer was also collected from Timothy Crosby's home. Investigators didn't initially notice anything suspicious, but they sent the computer in to the BCA for forensic analysis. The BCA discovered encrypted files, which revealed that Timothy Crosby had been researching. Among the items discovered was a handbook on how to abduct, torture, and kill women. There were also hundreds of images of sexually explicit content, including abductions, bondage, rape, and death, and articles related to rape, torture, and the murder of women and girls. The items discovered at Timothy Crosby's home and on his computer sealed the deal for the state's argument in favor of his involuntary commitment as a sexually dangerous person. Basically, a danger to society. Minnesota law allows the involuntary commitment of individuals who have been deemed by the court as a sexually dangerous person with a sexual psychopathic personality. The state must convince the court through evidence and expert testimony. In Timothy Crosby's case, that included a thorough examination of his criminal history and the expert testimony of 3 forensic psychologists. Involuntary civil commitment in the state of Minnesota is controversial. The state, as of 2023, had the highest commitment rate per capita and the lowest release rate. This is how the state defines the law. The Minnesota Commitment and Treatment Act is a civil law used to institutionalize a person for sex offender treatment in order to reduce the risk of future dangerous sexual behavior. Basically, the state argues that civil commitment is not a sentence that exists for punishment. Instead, civil commitments of this nature protect the public from sexually dangerous offenders while offering the treatment they require to possibly be reintegrated into society. But not everyone sees it the way the state sees it. Others, including Timothy Crosby, believe it is an unfair life sentence. When I first looked into Belinda's story, there wasn't a lot of information available, but I did come across the article from 2009 published in the Pioneer Press. And that is when I learned there was a suspect in the case, Timothy Crosby. So I looked into him and learned that he had been involuntarily committed to the Secure Sex Offender Treatment Program facility in Moose Lake. I looked Timothy Crosby up in the Minnesota Judicial Branch database and found some of the documents from his civil commitment hearing and appeals. And during the search, I came across a letter he wrote to a judge claiming he felt he was being unfairly imprisoned. That's when I started writing Timothy Crosby letters. I knew he would never agree to meet with me if I didn't first establish familiarity. We wrote a series of letters back and forth discussing his feelings about his civil commitment. He was angry, frustrated. He seemed so eager to get his side of the story out there through a reporter. It might sound odd that I first focused on his frustration with his civil commitment, but in order to even talk about someone's dissatisfaction with their civil commitment as a sexually dangerous person, you have to talk about the series of events that got them there in the first place. 3 women escaped from Timothy Crosby from 1974 to 1987. And here's a new piece of information revealed through court documents. There was at least one other victim. In 1972, 2 years before Belinda went missing, he kidnapped a teenage girl at gunpoint. She was hitchhiking. He forced her into the back seat of his car and sexually assaulted her. Because he was a minor, that case is sealed. But it was fair game for the courts in their quest to commit him. All of his known crimes played a critical role in his commitment. We received Belinda's investigative file from Wright County as I was receiving letters from Timothy Crosby. The case file included full police reports of his past crimes, including transcripts of the victims' statements, which brought their horrific experiences to life. They also gave me more insight into the mind of Timothy Crosby and what he is capable of. After reading through the file, I put in a formal media request through the Minnesota Department of Human Services for an on-the-record recorded interview, and he accepted. I drove to Moose Lake on a cold January afternoon. I checked in at a local hotel and began to prepare for the interview, scheduled for 1 p.m. the next day. I went over, again, what I wanted to ask and learn from Timothy Crosby. Did this man really have a 100% escape rate, or were there more victims? Was Belinda among those victims? Was he willing to tell me anything about the day before Belinda went missing, when he spoke with her at his cabin? Before making that drive, I also did some research on strategies for interviewing suspected serial killers. I found a series of articles written by former FBI interrogators, and this is what I learned from the experts. It's best to take a casual approach and make the person you're interviewing feel comfortable, like they're talking to a friend, someone willing to listen. The idea is that in that comfort zone, they're more likely to open up and provide more information, sometimes without even realizing it. That means no notepads, notebooks, pens, or computers. Thankfully, Timothy Crosby had agreed to the interview being recorded, so ditching the notes wasn't a big deal for me. The experts also advised to avoid being confrontational, especially at the beginning. It might seem reasonable or tempting to go in there and confront him and demand answers right from the start, but in the long run, that's not the best approach. After a night of preparation, I woke up, prepared some more, and drove across the street to the facility, nestled away in the woods and hidden from the view of the main road. The Moose Lake Center looks a lot like a prison. The grounds are surrounded by tall fences, topped with razor wire. When I got inside, they took my ID, phone, computer, and all other belongings aside from my recorder. They gave me a security badge that allowed me to enter the secured part of the facility, with a guard, of course. The guard, along with a media representative from the Minnesota Department of Human Services, led me to a visiting room. If you have watched TV shows where prisoners meet with visitors in a large room with multiple tables for multiple parties, you have a pretty good idea of what that room looked like. The tables were small. I had 2 microphones to set up, so I decided to join 2 tables together so the microphones could fit comfortably and we could have a bit more space between us. I'm Trisha Taurinskas, and you are Timothy Crosby?
Yeah.
All right. A lot of people have asked me if I didn't feel safe writing letters or meeting with Timothy Crosby because he obviously has my address. There is technically a remote possibility that he could be released from the facility, but based on what I've learned about civil commitment in Minnesota and Timothy Crosby's case, I feel confident that he will never be a free man. And here's why. In order to get out of the Moose Lake facility, the offender must first attend treatment programs and therapy sessions, which are all voluntary. That is step 1. If an offender is seen progressing in treatment, they are considered a candidate for the St. Peter facility. Reintegration into society is the focus at St. Peter. An offender who is still considered dangerous or lacks accountability for their actions is not a candidate for reintegration. Timothy Crosby is no longer attending treatment programs and sessions. That's his decision. So, without that, there is no road out of Moose Lake. Have your days been the same for the last decade? Or what does a typical day look like?
I can sit in my cell and we get called out for a meal. That's about our days here.
Okay. Are you enrolled in any sort of therapy program?
I used to go to groups and modules, what they call VELs, and I realized that there's just something not right about them. They were being run by people that just didn't know what they were doing and had a folder they'd look at. And you get no credit in any of your reports for having gone to it. So I thought, wow, there's something wrong here. You don't get no credit for what you're doing. You get no credit for your assignments that you might do. And your one-to-one talks with somebody, you get no credit. So I thought, what's the point?
He's also exhausted his appeals. Timothy Crosby's legal team lost their appeal in 2013 when they argued his 2009 arrest didn't prove an ongoing cycle of violent sexual activity. 3 psychologists testified against that line of reasoning. Then there's the issue of accountability. When I was there that day, I told Timothy Crosby that I had read the police reports and victim statements related to his 3 arrests in 1974, 1983, and 1987. And he told me the documents I read were inaccurate.
From what I've read of those 3 things, there's data errors in the reports. Just the ones that I've read. That's an error, that's an error, that's an error.
You mean like in
And
like the...
there's just nothing I can do to fix the errors, but the accusational assumptions.
So when you say data errors, do you mean like the testimony, like from the victims, or what? I guess I'm just trying to understand what you're disputing.
I just know that there was a time I read some of those. I don't think I have any of those much now, but there was errors in things, and there wasn't a thing I could do but tell my attorney at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but the errors still remained in the paperwork. And
he also related that argument to the 2009 conviction, when he hired a 17-year-old girl to perform sexual acts in his presence. For that, he pleaded guilty to using a minor in a sexual performance.
there was no evidence of this accusation or that accusation. That there is no evidence of those that proves those allegations. In fact,
Are we talking about 2009?
just in general, 2009, there's even some strong. That's why they didn't want it to go to trial, I think, is because they knew that what was going on was really not what I was being charged with.
He also had some explanations for the sexually violent items discovered on his computer and on his property. I mean, they did still find items in your home that related to violence.
I don't really know what they found in the home, and not everything they found in the home was even mine.
Oh, so you never saw those documents? Yeah,
Like
so
I
they
tried
did.
to tell you, there was a lot of stuff that they never told me about.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of people that lived in the home, a lot of people that had access to the computer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a pack rat.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they've identified me, as a person who just collects stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked at some jobs that had, they were throwing stuff out at times, and I scavenged it, I guess you could say. And whether it was books, magazines, or just in general.
So, with no voluntary treatment or accountability, and with no appeals left, Timothy Crosby could very likely be living out his days in Moose Lake. And he knows that. In light of his likely life sentence, I thought he might be more willing to provide information on Belinda's case. It was a long shot, but one worth taking. If you don't try, you'll never know. And sometimes, if a person denies an allegation, what they say or how they act when given the space to talk can be telling. Timothy Crosby was not thrilled when I mentioned Belinda, but how can a reporter discuss his frustration with his civil commitment without touching on the known crimes he's committed and the cases in which he's the main suspect? We've already played this portion of the interview in this series, but I'll play it again. Did you kill Belinda? Did you kidnap her or have anything to do with her going missing?
No. There ain't nothing I can do about anything. Can't change.
Can't change
Unless
what?
you guys find something after the fact. Somebody comes up and says, "Oh yeah, I was." You know what I'm trying to say? Unless somebody comes up, of course, Dwayne or Dwight can't. Did anyone even look at it? Maybe there was a family thing going on? Some of the family members might have been mad at her.
I noticed a pattern in that hour-long interview. One investigators and even the judge in his civil commitment noted, too. When I questioned him about his past known crimes, Timothy Crosby would, generally, first act oblivious, like he didn't know what I was talking about. He did this with Belinda's case, too. I asked Timothy Crosby about the day before Belinda went missing, when she went to his cabin, where he was staying alone.
I really didn't go there unless I was with family. You know, my dad spent a lot of time up there. And can't remember, was my sister down there that weekend too?
No.
Oh,
It was just you.
I don't remember.
Then his memories would come back to him. Kind of.
Well, I'd swear somebody had said something about a party, and that's why somebody was looking for Susan. Was she going to come up there? And I said, yeah, I think Susan's coming up this weekend. There was going to be a party there.
Yeah, Pam's party. So that would have been Sue's friend.
So I believe other people were around or were going to be around or something.
Oh, yeah, because she didn't show up to the party.
See, and I don't know any of that. See, I wasn't told a lot of things. I just know that when my attorney investigated stuff, I was ruled out.
And then the blame would be shifted or an explanation would be given. There was a lot more we discussed in that hour-long interview. He tried to persuade me that the state and everybody had gotten him all wrong, that he was a changed man. Do you consider yourself a dangerous person now? Who's likely to reconvict?
And I wasn't then.
Reoffend?
No. Not dangerous now, and I wasn't in 2009. In the 90s and 80s. No.
You weren't, okay, but you weren't dangerous in the 70s and 80s? I mean, you had mentioned you didn't really know what was going on, there were issues, and then you did get treatment.
Well, I think you said it yourself when you said I was 19, 18, young back then. And there's a lot of things in life that I had no clue about. And as I grew up, I experienced life for the first time in a lot of ways. And I don't know how else to explain that.
We also talked about his track record. It's entirely possible that all of Timothy Crosby's victims escaped. Yet, that does beg the question, does this man really have a 100% escape rate? And does he understand why investigators believe there could have been other victims? I mean, I think a lot of people, too, would look at that and say, okay, you were convicted 3 times because 3 women escaped. So do you think it's reasonable for them to assume there were more?
I don't know how to answer that. I really trying to think about how they would have thought, but no. I think each situation is unique, and by them assuming something,
He then changed the subject to his 2009 conviction. At the end of the interview, I think he realized that I had more access to more information on his criminal history than he had anticipated. And he wasn't happy that I continued to ask about Belinda. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
And
I think our time's up.
yeah, I guess I was hoping you were here for another reason, but I guess you're not.
Sorry to disappoint.
Well, I'm hoping you cared about what and this guy works with you.
Huh?
This guy works for you.
No.
Another cop.
When we first received the investigative file for Belinda's disappearance, the contents of the file weren't organized in chronological order. So it took some time to put the pieces of the puzzle together, from the day Belinda went missing to present time. And after reading the file in chronological order, with the full timeline of events, I could not help but ask the question, did Lieutenant Mike Lindquist see Timothy Crosby's indefinite commitment as a form of justice for Belinda? Lindquist went to great lengths, and oftentimes must have felt like he was so close to obtaining the evidence he needed to prove his theory that Timothy Crosby took Belinda. But in the end, he came up short. Timothy Crosby has not been charged with a crime related to Belinda's disappearance, but he is likely to remain locked up for the rest of his life, unable to cause harm to any more women. I haven't been able to ask Mike Lindquist that question yet. If he feels like maybe Timothy Crosby's indefinite detention is the next best thing to a conviction in Belinda's case. But I did ask Belinda's siblings. And remember, when Timothy Crosby was civilly committed, nobody called Belinda's family members to say, hey, the main suspect in Belinda's case is now locked up and likely will be forever. Is that a form of justice to you?
If they would have told us about it, maybe. Yeah. Yes and no, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Ambiguous about it, I think. Yes, because it is. But it's still because you didn't know it was.
And if that's what you're going to call it, then where's your body? Yeah, there's still no.
There's no.
I mean,
where's the final closure?
You want 100% closure
For us. Where's your
Yeah.
body? Period. Yeah, I mean, yes, it's good to know that if he was the person who did that, then he is behind bars. But then you need to, yeah, as you said, where's the rest of it? You need to kind of have that part. Like Pam said, it's to have that final closure. Yeah. So, because we've talked about this before, we don't want this to happen. This is not something we want to continue into the next generation of our family.
There is one remaining episode in this series, The Disappearance of Belinda Van Lith. Look for Part 7, coming soon, wherever you listen to podcasts. You've been listening to The Vault, a Forum Communications podcast. To see documents and photos from the investigative file, visit inforum.com/Belinda. To support our work at The Vault, become a subscriber at inforum.com/subscribe. You can also support us by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. This podcast is written, narrated, and produced by me, Trisha Taurinskas. The Vault's editor is Jeremy Fugelberg. If you have any information you'd like to share with us, you can find my email in the show notes. Thank you for listening.